Hey y'all, so all the videos that I have done up until this point are, they really have been more for people who already consider themselves poets, people who are already experienced with writing poetry, and that's why they're so kind of in depth. So this video is going to be geared more towards like true beginners of writing poetry. So in this video, I'm going to cover some basics, some very, very basic concepts that can be used not only in poetry, but in short story and just other fiction in general. But these are very important aspects of poetry and sort of like the foundations of poetry. So we're going to start with metaphor. I'm sure most of y'all have heard the word metaphor, but I'm not sure if most of y'all can use it, like know how to use one in a poem, or know the definition of like what does it mean. So let's go over a metaphor. A metaphor is basically you're making a comparison between two unrelated things, but you relate them through symbolism. So basically one thing becomes another thing. If that didn't do it for you, if that definition wasn't enough. Also, let me give you an example first. A metaphor. My limbs were heavy sandbags, which required too much energy to try and move. Alright, that's an example of a metaphor. Were your limbs, did they really become sandbags? No. But it does a better job of conveying your message, right? You could have just said, my limbs were heavy, so I didn't want to move. My limbs felt heavy, so I didn't want to move. That's literal, right? But all of these terms that I'm going to go over, they fall under the category of figurative language. There's literal language and there's figurative language. Literal language is just you say things as they are, you take things at face value, and they don't have any symbolism, they don't have any deeper meaning behind the face value, the initial meaning, right? So all of these go outside of that and they're figurative. So anyways, with metaphor, like I said, it creates sort of an image in the reader's head, and it just adds more color to your writing, and it makes it more interesting. So that's my definition of a metaphor. I looked on Grammarly.com, which is like a blog kind of for other writers, to see what they define a metaphor as. So I'm going to read you a little bit of what they said. So they said a metaphor states that one thing is another thing. It equates those two things not because they are actually the same, but for the sake of comparison or symbolism. So, like I said, one thing becomes another thing. It is that thing. All right, let me explain the difference between a metaphor then and a simile. So a simile is very, very similar to a metaphor in that it's making a comparison of two unrelated things, but you use the word like or as to facilitate the comparison. So let me explain. Let me give you an example. His hair was thick like a lion's mane. You use the word like. If that was a metaphor, I would say his hair was a lion's mane. All right? Notice I didn't use the word like or as, but it's a simile. So I say his hair was thick like a lion's mane. Same comparison. I'm just adding the word like. Or I could say his hair was thick as a lion's mane. Like or as. So that's metaphor and simile. Those are the two probably most common that you're going to be using in poetry. An exercise for y'all: start writing down like a list of metaphors and similes, because I promise you, once you start thinking figuratively, once you start thinking symbolically, it'll be way easier for you to start writing poems, because metaphor and simile are such big, huge aspects of what poetry is. So once you start thinking that way, it'll be way easier for you to start actually piecing them together and creating whole works of poems, of literature. So, metaphor and simile. moving on to imagery. So imagery is basically creating an image in the reader's head, like I said, through vivid language, through detailed language. All right, so this is describing something so in depth that it appeals to all five senses. This is what I mean when I say it appeals to all five senses. You have touch, taste, sight, hearing, and smell, right? So describing a scene appealing to all five senses will definitely put the reader in the scene. Like, they will feel like they're there. Let's say you're in a kitchen, right? You're writing a poem about being in a kitchen while your auntie is cooking. So you're going to describe the smells. Let's say she's cooking tamales or whatever. All right, so you describe the smells, the smell of the meat, the smell of, everything. Then you'll talk about what do you see. Describe in detail what you see around you. Just set the scene of the kitchen, right? The tile, the walls, what is your tia, your auntie wearing, and this, and that. So describe, what do you see? What do you hear? Is there music playing in the background? Is she cooking to a song? Do you hear the sizzling and popping of the oil in the pan? Things like that. Touch, what do you feel? Are you helping her cook? So yeah, what do you feel? And then taste. So tasting the final product, how does it taste? Describe that, and you can do a lot of comparisons with that. So that's what imagery is in my definition, and just an example of it. Here is a dictionary definition of imagery right here. So it says, visually descriptive or figurative language, especially in a literary work, visual images collectively, and visual symbolism. So yeah, hopefully you understand imagery now, and we'll move on to hyperbole. So hyperbole is just basically an over-exaggeration of something to get the point across. So for an example, a cliche hyperbole is, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. You're not actually going to eat a horse. The reader knows you're not actually going to go and eat a horse. But by over-exaggerating it to that extent, what you're doing is emphasizing the fact that you're hungry. So that's the purpose of the hyperbole, is to emphasize the meaning of what you're trying to say. So yeah, short and sweet hyperbole. And then finally, I'll be talking about personification. So personification is the act of giving inanimate objects human-like characteristics. So let's say I could feel the heartbeat of the earth underneath my palm, right, as I press my hand to the soil. So we know that the earth does not have a heartbeat like humans do, right? But by giving the earth human-like characteristics, we explore a different meaning of that. It's looking beyond face value, and you could describe the earth in detail, but when you give it a human characteristic, it makes the reader almost relate to it on a deeper level, on a different level, and it's all symbolism. So yeah, those were the terms that I was gonna cover. Hopefully, beginning poetry writers, hopefully you kind of understand a little bit more about the aspects of poetry, like the foundations. These are the basics of poetry. So once you start thinking symbolically, once you start thinking figuratively, once you start taking things out of context, taking things out of their original meaning, and looking deeper and thinking outside of the box, then you are ready to start writing poetry, because that is what poetry is. It's all symbolism, and it's very multifaceted and deep. So thank you for watching. Hopefully that helped you out. Any questions, like I said, go ahead, leave it in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. So thank you for watching.